And then do you want to bring up the video?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to put our comments right here so then we can pass it?
Do what?
Do you want to put our food up here? Or just leave it back?
I think it's good.
One quick thing. While she's asking questions, like one of us.
Yeah.
So did you all read anything on feng shui? Chinese food.
Oh.
We need to make sure the volume level of every single category, like I'm trying to pick like the most important though, because when you put success, I feel like we could lecture about it for a little bit afterwards and not get through everything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Chinese culture.
All right, so I can present it.
Yeah, I
present
really
for
think
you.
it's cool.
Yeah,
Well, and there's
Oh, yeah.
some that are like very traditional, some that evolve different times, some that are new, and it's hard to just like lump the north and the south into one and compare it.
It's amazing how much importance they put in feng shui.
Can y'all hear that?
So, yeah, so that's what's good.
We'll adjust.
We can talk later.
Well, like,
I don't know how to.
Do you know how to turn the volume up?
Like,
No, because earlier we tried to.
Shoot.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Should I call the IT person?
No, we'll just have to listen
There might be
close.
subtitles.
we can CC it. Closed caption.
Okay.
Sorry.
Perfect. Because it's just.
It's just really soft.
It's playing, I think. I think it's playing through the. The only thing is, like, it might be hard to understand her speaking.
Yeah.
Try it. You do it. CC. Click CC.
Okay. We may just have to do that.
What's C?
Yeah, they'll have subtitles.
Oh,
I don't know what he did that caused it to pick on this, you know.
yeah, I'm not very tech savvy.
Did you
So.
want me to, we've got a little time, do you want me to call him and ask him?
Oh,
Is
I
it
mean,
okay?
I think it's
It should be fine with the subtitles.
All
We
right.
can have you
Just
guys watch
everyone-
it.
Thank you.
Yeah, just be super good.
Mom's in English.
It's English.
it's definitely. All right, is everyone here?
So, everybody,
No.
no, we've got,
Okay.
Jenny and.
We are having a party back there.
Kitty Joe's Black.
Okay, is everyone back now? Is everyone?
I think so.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Alright, so the culture we chose to do was Syrian immigrants in America, which we thought was pretty present, like something that we're dealing with now. A lot of them are immigrating from their country to here because of the high levels of conflict. So let's go to the slide. We're just going to talk a little bit about the background of Syria. So it's called the Syrian Arab Republic. It's on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, which is in the past like a trade route between the east and the west. So that's kind of why it's been occupied and invaded by a lot of different countries over its history. The last one that it was invaded by was the French, where it actually finally became the Syrian Arab Republic in 1946. It's also the site of many holy places in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. So let's look. It's about 71,500 miles, so think of it as like a bit bigger than North Dakota. So it's kind of a small country. It's mostly desert, but around the edge is the Fertile Crescent, where most of the population lives, and they have more greenery and stuff there. It's currently in a civil war, and it's pretty a high conflict area at this time.
Okay, so this is a picture I found that I thought was really interesting. So the picture at the top is March 2012, shortly after the civil war started in Syria, and this is a satellite image from space of, you've seen those with like the city lights at night. So the top is March 2012, and then the bottom is February 2014. So this, just to give y'all perspective, this is Aleppo, one of the major cities in Syria, and it is almost completely dark. So that's almost like, I read something about the equivalent of Manhattan just going completely dark. So like about 5-6 million people, that's a lot. So this has been a big impact even in just the past few years, and we've seen just a flood of immigration all over the world, not just America, of Syrians. So I just thought that was kind of a poignant thing to bring up. So sorry. Okay.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of Syrians in America. The first wave of immigrants came over about between 1899 and 1919. They primarily, if you can go maybe to it might be good for them to have a visual of the map. But so the first wave kind of accumulated in Brooklyn, in Detroit, and then also in the Boston area first. You can see kind of in New England how there's like a large clump there. And primarily in the first wave, kind of what they were seeking when they decided to come to America was, at the time, religious freedom was a big reason. And then also they were trying to, some of them, avoid being recruited to the Turkish military. And then the third reason was kind of a reason that a lot of people decided to come to America, and that was for the American dream to economically improve not only themselves but their families. So some people would come here just like maybe the father, and he would come here and he would work and he would make as much money, and then he would maybe go back to his family back in Syria. And then, so kind of thinking, where are they today? We've had a lot more accumulate in California. Brooklyn is now considered, they call it Little Syria in America. And then also more have come to Boston, Detroit, and then New Orleans, Los Angeles, and Houston. And so I think actually there's been several students that have done research with Syrians in Houston, which I think is informational for us, just like the China group, that these are definitely people that we at some point can be working with. And I just found it interesting that that's kind of like the more recent location for a lot of these immigrants after the 2011 conflict. I was very curious as to what their employment was in America. When they first came, a lot of them were just peddling and doing jobs kind of like that. And then around the 1960s and 70s, they started working in the factories. But due to cutbacks in the auto sector, a lot of them were first forced to go on welfare. And then the most recent wave of immigrants, they are very well educated, very well trained people, and they work in any fields ranging from like computer science, banking to medicine. So these are well educated people. I think sometimes it's easy to look at what's going on if you're not super informed on what is going on, to think that these are people that were, I don't know, maybe homeless or didn't have a large income. But whenever this happened in Syria, a lot of them were people that had normal jobs. They had homes, they had cars, they were working people with bachelor's degrees and even continuing education. So just something to keep in mind if you are working with these people.
Yeah, and just a note, it says that 86,000 Syrians reside in the U.S. as of 2014. We couldn't find any more recent census data. So, I mean, that's pretty recent, but I mean, it's 2016, getting to the end of it, and I'm sure there's quite a few more. And just a personal story, I worked with a physical therapist who worked at MD Anderson in Houston, and she said even more than Spanish, Arabic was a language that she had to use with clients more often than not, and she even picked up some Arabic. And we'll get to that later, but Arabic is their primary language. I just thought that was really interesting because it's so close to home. So.
I'm going to talk about some of the customs. So in Syria and people from Syria, they really take family reputation as like their number one. That is the most important thing for them. Their family reputation. Every one of them represents their family, and whether you're doing something in public or at home, like your actions represent the family, and if you dishonor them, that's really not okay. Family is considered the basic unit of society, so it's really family oriented. You know, that's something we really want to keep in mind while we're working with them in OT, because we want to recognize that we're not really just doing rehab on our one client. We're helping their whole family. And so we have to keep that in mind with them coming to appointments and things like that. Be really respectful. The family dynamic is patriarchal. So the eldest man in the house will be in charge, whether that's, the eldest son, if some tragedy happens, or the grandfather. Just keep in mind that the eldest man in the house will always be in charge. The marriages will be arranged. Women are seen as needing protection. And typically there are several generations that live in the same house. So that means instead of in America, a general thing for us is if our family's elderly and they need more help, we'll send them to an assisted living, but that's not a thing for those, who live in Syria and grew up in the Syrian culture. They really keep all of their family members at home and very close to them. So that's another really important thing for OTs, that we want to get them home. We always want them to be home with their families. And then there's some really cool things that they do that we do differently. So it's probably a huge culture shock for them to come to America. So we want to keep this in mind while we're, doing rehab therapy on them. And if we see them in public, it's really important to just kind of acknowledge this. So men and women show affection in public towards the same sex. And men will hold hands and greet each other with kisses on the cheek. That's just kind of the normal way that they greet and say hi and stuff. But there is a huge stigma against gays and openly gay behavior. So LGBT individuals will keep their sexuality very private. And that can be a huge culture shock coming to America and seeing how open we are and how, we don't stigmatize that. We're just yeah, we accept everything. So that's probably a huge culture shock for them. Huge culture shock. And then the people of Syria, they have really intense ways of communicating. They're really excited and loud, and they get very close to one another. It's very, I've read that people think they're fighting, but they're not. They're just hanging out, being good friends. I understand, I'm the same way. And then an important thing for us is that they prefer to be seen by same-sex healthcare providers. So men will want to be seen with men, and specifically with women, women will want to be seen with other women healthcare providers. So that's really important when we're working in a hospital or anything like that. And I'm also going to talk about their clothing. So in Syria, the clothing must be very modest and not attract a lot of attention. So generally only the face, hands, and feet are shown. The materials are very thick and loose fitting. And a newer thing, the younger upper class citizens are now preferring a more westernized type of wear. And so they like bright colors, jewelry, makeup, kind of showy things like that. Men wear a traditional kaftan, and the women wear a black garment called an abaya that covers them from the shoulders, their hands, and all the way to their hands and then to their feet. But in the war zone right now, women are really kind of they're not allowed to wear just that. They have to wear a headscarf that leaves only their eyes peeking out. So it's really exclusive as to what they can wear.
Is that because of the ISIS control?
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's
Okay, so we haven't talked about religion yet, but it's later coming. So there is Muslim and Christian populations in Syria. So they practice both Christian holidays and Muslim holidays. So one of the main ones, and a lot of people have talked about, they observe Ramadan, which is where they fast from sunup to sundown. It's a big time to think about ways to better yourself. And at the end, they will celebrate with 3 days of feasting called Eid. This is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And they say Ramadan was when the Quran was revealed to Muhammad. And then the other one is Hajj, which is the end of the pilgrimage to Mecca. And Muslims are supposed to take this journey once in their life. Another of the 5 pillars of Islam. And Eid al-Adha is a 3-day feast related to this, where they will sacrifice a lamb at the end. Other holidays that are celebrated by Muslims are Muslim New Year. They celebrate the Prophet Muhammad's birthday and a feast to celebrate his nocturnal visit to heaven. The Christians in Syria are Eastern Orthodox, so that's a little different than how we generally practice in America, Christian cultures. So they will fast 40 days for Lent, which Catholics practice this here, but they abstain from all meat products, which is a little different. They also celebrate their holidays based on the Eastern Orthodox calendar, so their Christmas will fall in different days than ours. And Easter is more important to them than Christmas, actually. Holidays in Syria are family and community oriented. They're very social, so people will be visiting a lot and seeing one another during those times. And the marriage ceremonies, Kelly kind of mentioned it too, they're arranged, so that's something to consider.
Okay, so I researched a little bit about their cuisine. It's because they were under rule of so many different governing bodies, and they're kind of in a really just the part of the world that they're in. Their cuisine is influenced by several cultures, but it is kind of like that Mediterranean, kind of Lebanese that you typically think of, hummus and things like that. So mezza, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, are the kind of like the small bite appetizers, the hummus. The baba ganoush, which is like yogurt and eggplant. Eggplant seems to be a really big thing they use throughout all their dishes. And then you have, I didn't put it on here, but there's like a salad typically next. And then the main dishes are kebabs and kibbeh. And then they also have sweets and baklava, or baklava, like how we probably pronounce it here, is a pastry covered in honey that's really popular. And then they also drink several varieties of tea and coffee. They drink what they call American coffee, as well as I think it was Turkish coffee. So if you've ever had Turkish coffee, it's quite different. And then they do have kind of like street food. So if you've ever been to Europe, there's a lot of like street trucks and things that sell falafel and shawarma, and those are extremely popular. That's kind of, and of course in Syria as well, but it seems to be pretty big in Europe as well. So. And then I just put dietary restrictions on there. So like especially the Christians during Lent, they follow a very strict diet. Obviously, they're basically vegan. So if it is their time, if they're in the hospital, you want to be mindful of that and understand what they eat, what they don't eat. And then in the Islamic faith, they also don't eat pork. So, okay, and this is me. So getting into religion. So in Syria, 90% of the population practices Islam, and there's several different sects that I didn't go into all that. It's pretty complicated. And then about 10% is Christianity. And relative to their surrounding countries, Syria has had an amount of religious tolerance, a history of religious tolerance there, and is considered a pretty secular society. Now, right now, with everything going on, it's a little bit different, but in their past, in their history, you can see the bottom left picture are people praying in a mosque, and then on the right, they're holding a cross, and a lot of Christians wear crosses all the time. And yeah, Lent kind of covered that. And then, like Rachel said, Easter is considered a lot more important than Christmas to them, the Christians. And then I forgot to say, I'm sorry, for Muslim, the Muslim religion, they do pray 5 times a day, the pretty devout folks. And they also cleanse themselves before praying. So I think a lot of groups talked about that as well. So. And then death and dying, I thought this was pretty interesting. This is kind of a little more related to the Islamic faith, is the research that I found. So when they are basically in like what's equivalent to hospice care here, the family is very much a part of making their last days very comfortable and calming for them. And their last words that they speak on earth are meant to be a declaration of faith. That's very much encouraged in the Islamic faith. And the body after death is considered very sacred. So the family typically takes the responsibility of washing and shrouding the body before burial. And I have on there that burial is supposed to be done within 24 hours. So I was kind of interested, since in anatomy we did the cadaver lab. Obviously, and this is being a Muslim, that's a thing that they do not allow, because that's considered, any kind of cutting or anything like that is considered very against their religion, and since it's a sacred, you're a sacred being. So that's like for autopsies and stuff as well. And another thing that I thought was just kind of interesting, organ donation is actually considered, they really do want you to donate your organs, because that's considered, if you can save a life in the Quran, that's very valuable. So it's a little not related, but that was interesting. And in the morning time, so family and friends generally mourn for about 3 days after death. And for family, it tends to be a lot longer. And the widow dresses in black to mourn, and typically they never remarry. And sometimes they dress in mourning for the rest of their life. So that was just interesting. And then a loss someone who dies as a Muslim, they consider it a loss to the Muslim community. It's not just a loss for the family, it's the whole community. So I thought that was kind of interesting too.
Okay, so a little bit about healthcare. In Syria, after 2011, by 2013, half of the country's healthcare facilities had been destroyed or damaged, and most of the healthcare professionals had either fled the country, or they were injured, or they had died. And so after that, drug production fell, so treatment for chronic and critical illnesses became almost impossible. By targeting medical facilities and blocking humanitarian medical aid, the Syrian government has prevented its citizens living in areas under the control of opposition forces from receiving health care. So that's just a really tough situation. And after 2011, one of the major needs for Syria was mental health. And kind of like the China group, this culture views mental illnesses as kind of dishonoring to the family, so having one or being treated for one. And so that could possibly be one of the explanations that, for just a staggering statistic, they only had 2 psychiatric hospitals and 70 psychiatrists serving 22 million people in the country, which is really, really shocking. And so after the Civil War happened, their mentality on mental health kind of started to shift, and they were definitely they're more open to it now than they were before the Civil War, which you can imagine why. And so treating this culture, definitely keep in mind to just be culturally sensitive, a lot of things that she mentioned, and just keeping in mind that a lot of people are going to want to be treated by the same sex. So females are going to want to have female gynecologists and nurses. They're probably going to be more embarrassed to share personal things, especially regarding sex. The women are going to want to wear long gowns in the hospital. They have very high regard for doctors, so they respect their opinion very much, and are very attentive to the doctors, and will probably stand by whatever the doctor says. And then also just keeping in mind the dietary stuff, as far as the Islamic dietary laws and that sort of thing. So if they're in the hospital, just trying to be mindful of that as well.
So some normal occupations for people in the Syrian culture. Women are generally in a traditional role where they're homemaker, take care of the children. And they take great pride in their ability to keep home and to cook. So that will come back to our client later. That's important to her culture, to keep her home well, and they take great pride in that. But now, in more higher class, upper socioeconomic status people, women are having more jobs, so they could be in any positions such as government services, education, social work, just like us now. So they're pretty modern in that aspect, but in the lower socioeconomic areas, they may not have as many women in the workforce. Conservative Muslim women do not socialize with men outside of their family either, so that's something to consider as far as the culture goes. Men are generally responsible for the financial stability of the family, and that's their job, is to have a job and be the head of the family. Girls will help with housework when they get older, and boys will also help with the financial aspect, but education is important in this culture, so the children won't really start that until after they've completed their education. Similar to American culture, children are encouraged to be children and to play, and they really do love their children and will lift them up and play with other people's kids, and having kids and letting them have fun is really important to their culture. Other things as a culture they enjoy doing, they enjoy sports, they like soccer, they really enjoy socializing and eating together. Meals are really important. And they can last up to like 3 hours where they'll have like family and friends and they're all sitting around eating dinner and talking.
Okay, so this brings us to, we picked Bonnie Grape to focus on for our client, and like Rachel was talking about, being a mother in the home and everything is really important. So just kind of her occupational profile, she's the mother of 4 children, she's a widower, and her husband committed suicide. And suicide, especially in the Islamic faith, is pretty well frowned upon. Just as a side note, she's morbidly obese, which interferes with her daily occupations. She's also very depressed, as you can imagine. She does enjoy eating, so we kind of took that into account with our picking our activity. And she really does love her children. And like Rachel was just saying, in Syria, children and families, there's so much love. There's a lot of research that we were doing that I found just pictures of love and everything, so it's pretty cool. So we picked cooking because, again, it's a really important activity for the mother to do in the Syrian culture. And through that, we picked a task-oriented approach. So we looked at the different skills that it takes to cook and looked at what Bonnie may or may not have. So we kind of narrowed it down to 3 different things. Sensory modulation, endurance, and planning were the things that we decided to work on. And with that task-oriented approach in therapy, we would hopefully either go to her home or use a kitchen set up in the clinic to have her actually cook a meal. So to kind of go through the different performance skills. So for like sensory modulation, so Bonnie was just the type of person with Arnie and dealing with him, little things would just kind of set her off and make her angry. So working on that to help her get through a task and not get frustrated and just quit it, we decided the cooking would be good because it would be something that she would enjoy and that would keep her motivated. And then with endurance, obviously that's pretty self-explanatory. We would start out with a really simple meal or dish such as hummus, which we will be serving in a few minutes. Start out with a really simple dish that doesn't take very long, and to like grade it up or down, put a chair in the kitchen with her and increase or decrease rest breaks, and then kind of go along and do more complicated meals with her. So it takes longer, so she has to use more energy, and then that kind of goes along with the planning. So from very simple dish from hummus to maybe kebabs, which are a little more complicated, planning that out would take just kind of on that spectrum from simple to complex. So that's what we talked about. Okay, and then so our quiz. Okay, so just shout it out or raise your hand, whatever. When did the civil war in Syria begin? 2011, yeah. And what is one important holiday to the Syrian culture? Ramadan, I would say, mostly because that's Islam is the dominant religion. In the healthcare setting, how can we be sensitive to Syrian culture? Yeah, that's in dietary restrictions. And then where did Syrians immigrate to in America? Yeah, and then Houston too. Keep that in mind. It's a really big. There's a really big population there, and that is super close to home. So, and then what leisure activities do Syrians participate in? Soccer. Yeah, it's kind of cool because there's a lot of parallels to American culture. So, does anyone have any questions or anything? I hope this was interesting. We are gonna serve hummus, so stay tuned. Little side note. Oh yeah. Little side note. The hummus is a little garlicky, so if you're not a fan, I don't know if you'd want to try it. Just give it a little try. And we're gonna play this little video while we serve the dish. I'm sorry, this is the loudest it will go. questions or anything? All right.
No, I have a question.
What's up?
I don't know if you would know the answer. So in like the video, the mom was wearing like the headpiece. Why did the dog not?
Well, and if anyone knows better, correct me, but if you're a Muslim woman, you do have the choice to wear the hijab, but in countries like Syria where ISIS has taken over, they do have more like strict dress code, just because that's kind of the dominating force. But you do have a choice, especially here in America, to wear it or not. So, I don't know. If anyone has any other input, go.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those who wear their headscarf here. So I think even in Turkey and Syria and all that, some of those countries, the women didn't really cover themselves as much. But now there's an increasing trend for women to cover themselves. And you've seen that even here in the US, but they say that that's their choice. Okay, so while y'all are eating hummus, Sita,